Our top lead. A couple of months ago, the Indian government was worried about hate crimes and racial attacks against Indians in Canada. Now, most of these incidents had involved Khalistanis. There was vandalism, violent attacks, protests. Khalistani elements in Canada pretty much had a free run. They have defaced Hindu temples, they have attacked regular citizens, and they have held a referendum on Khalistan. Despite the Indian government's pleas, the Trudeau government did precious little to rein in these terrorists, primarily because of its vote bank politics. And this is what it has resulted in. Let's put the pictures of the tableau that has now gone viral on our screens and stay with this for some time. Khalistani radicals celebrating and glorifying the assassination of Indira Gandhi by her bodyguards. This is something that was on the streets of Brampton during a parade. The tableau on your screens is actually showing former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, her sari soaked in blood, with her hands in the air as some uniformed Sikhs fire at her. Now, this June 4th parade was organized by Khalistani groups 2 days ago, ahead of the anniversary of Operation Blue Star. If you remember, Operation Blue Star refers to an operation launched by the Indian Army to remove pro-Khalistani militants who were occupying the Golden Temple in Amritsar in 1984. It had triggered a sequence of events that had led to the assassination of Indira Gandhi by 2 of her Sikh bodyguards. The video went viral and drew fire from India. While the Canadian government is mum, the Canadian High Commissioner, Cameron McKay, took to Twitter to condemn the celebration of this violence in Brampton. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar didn't wince his words. This is what he said. Listen in.
Answer it because I think there's a bigger issue involved. And the bigger issue involved is really the space that Canada has continuously and frankly to us, we are at a loss to understand other than the requirements of vote bank politics, why anybody would do this. Because if you look at their history, I mean, you would imagine that they learn by the history and they wouldn't like to repeat their history. So it isn't only one incident, however egregious it may be. I think there is a larger underlying issue about the space which is given to separatists, to extremists, to people who advocate violence. And I think it's not good for the relationship, and I think it's not good for Canada.
Now, despite the constant push from India to act, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has failed to take any action against a new wave of Khalistani activism in Canada. Some believe it has a lot to do with Trudeau's minority government in Canada, which is backed by the New Democratic Party. It's a party that is headed by Jagmeet Singh, who's a Khalistani sympathizer. He has 24 seats in Parliament, and his support is critical to the survival of the Trudeau government. Which is why the Trudeau government was mum in September 2022, when pro-Khalistani groups, Seek for Justice, for example, organized a separatist event called the Khalistani referendum, again in Brampton, which saw the participation of over 1 lakh Sikhs. Now, the SFJ, that's Seek for Justice, is an unlawful organization and has been banned in India for pushing its extremist agenda. The Indian government had warned the Canadian government of extremist events like these. But what did the Canadian government do? Absolutely nothing. The Canadian government refused to stop this event, saying it was a peaceful and democratic process. Meanwhile, there are many on Twitter who are fuming over this tableau. The video, as I said, has gone viral, and one of the first people to tweet about it was Milind Deora, who was demanding condemnation and a universal response against this celebration of violence and assassination. Milind Deora is joining me on the broadcast. Milind, thank you very much for your time here on Mirror Now. Can I start by asking you, what prompted you to put out this tweet?
Well, firstly, I have an old relationship as a family with Indira Gandhi. I had a great fortune of seeing her several times as a young child before she was assassinated. My late father was extremely close to her, so there's a personal connection. But far more than that, as an Indian, it's appalling to see that a country would allow extremist fringe elements to celebrate in a tableau at a parade in a city in Canada, Indiraji's assassination. And this frankly transcends politics. And when I put this tweet out saying that this deserves universal condemnation, cutting across party lines, and a united effort to fight extremism, it's a bittersweet moment because it's bitter because it's as I said, it's appalling and disgusting to see that somebody would actually celebrate her assassination in a foreign country. But it's sweet in that people cutting across party lines supported my tweet and demanded condemnation and demanded that the government of India, the Ministry of External Affairs, takes this up with the Canadian High Commission in India and with the Canadian government.
Now, we've also now heard from the External Affairs Minister of India, and he's made a statement that what happened in Brampton is not good for India-Canada relations, and that nothing explains this other than vote bank politics. How do you assess the statement from the External Affairs Minister, and do you think it's enough?
I think that the government of India must lodge a very strong protest with the Canadian government, and I think that the Canadian government must, in turn, feel the pressure of the world's largest democracy to weed out these extremist elements. And to be very candid with you, if this is something if the Congress party was in power and I was a union minister again in the Congress government, and this happened to a BJP or the former prime minister of another party who had been assassinated, I would have lodged the strongest protest. In fact, I would have gone marching to the Ministry of External Affairs and demanded that at the very least they summon the Canadian High Commission and express our strongest displeasure. So a statement is fine, but I think we must ensure that countries like Canada or anywhere else in the world do much more to root out these extremist elements from their society. This is something, as I said, that transcends politics. It transcends the pettiness that we see domestically. Every political party, every Indian should rise above this and should ensure that if an Indian Prime Minister, a great Indian Prime Minister, who, by the way, was praised cutting across party lines, let's not forget the first BJP Prime Minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, called her Durga. If somebody who has been assassinated has been martyred, her assassination is celebrated. Clearly, in the country that it's being celebrated, that country has to introspect and has to do more to weed out these extremists.
But the fact is that Canada hasn't introspected. The fact is that Justin Trudeau has a history when it comes to instances like this. For example, in Canada last year, in the same town, Brampton, just by the way, where the parade was held yesterday, you had a Khalistani referendum. The Indian government had warned the Canadian government that this is going to happen, and yet the Canadian government did simply nothing about it. There is a reason for it. The Sikhs form, they are a huge vote bank. You're saying that we should take this entire issue up more strongly with the Canadians. Question is, will it help? It's not helped in the past. Do you think it'll help this time?
Look, you're making it a Khalistani issue. To me, it's much more than that. As I said, it's a personal issue for me. This is somebody who I knew and my family knew extremely well. And as a person who knew her personally, as a congressman, I'm appalled and extremely perturbed by this development. But this is more than what's happening with Khalistani extremists in Canada. This could happen in another country. It could be another issue. It could be another former prime minister. This should not be allowed. If tomorrow it's another prime minister from another party, I would condemn it with the same words. India today is a strong power globally. India is the world's largest democracy. India must ensure that the legacy of its prime ministers, whether you like that prime minister, you dislike that prime minister, whether you are from a particular party or you have an affinity to another party, must be protected at all costs. And the same grace should be shown by India if ever a fringe element in India did that to another country. So we have to also walk the talk. We can't just do it one way. But in my opinion, today is what this incident that happened, this video which has gone viral, this tweet which has gone viral, I have seen support cutting across party lines, across the political spectrum. That to me is encouraging. And I think that has strengthened the hands of the Indian government and of the Ministry of External Affairs in particular to lodge a very strong protest which expresses our displeasure in no uncertain terms.
Okay, we leave it there for the moment, Milind Deora. Thank you very much. The tweet you put out has certainly opened up a debate here in India, and it's a very legitimate debate. This is a former Prime Minister of India. She was assassinated on Indian soil, and that assassination is being celebrated on Canadian soil, and the Canadian government is doing absolutely nothing to rein in those terrorists who are glorifying and celebrating it. Anil Trigunyat, thank you very much for joining us. You're a former ambassador, Pratikit Pine. You're a geopolitical analyst. You're joining us as well. Anil Trigunyat, can I ask you if India right now can do anything beyond what they have already done? And what they have already done is simply the External Affairs Minister making a statement, a strong statement, but nothing beyond this. Do you see the Indian government, the current Indian government, taking up the matter forcefully with the Canadian government at all, given the fact that we know where the loyalties of the Canadian government lie?
Well, you're right, Shreya. You know, we have seen, it's not now, but it has been for decades, that in Canada, these extremist elements, the militancy against India continues to survive and thrive. And the Brampton, where more than 20% of the population is Sikh, it's called Mini Punjab. These kind of incidents have been repeatedly happening. And as the External Affairs Minister clearly said, it's perhaps due to the geopolitics and, the vote politics, which we know that is the reason. That's why Justin Trudeau is not doing anything. And we had seen when he visited India, what he did at the time, the kind of people he brought along, his closeness to Jagmeet Singh and all. So all these are very clearly evident. But what is it doing to the Canadians' image also is something, as far as India is concerned, we need to see that it is very hostile action on the part of the Canadian government not to take action on these kind of things, because this is something, a fight against terrorism is being defeated on the Canadian soil by the Canadian government itself. So we need to take it up very strongly. And I'm happy that Dr. Jaishankar very clearly mentioned that this will impact the relationship. And it is not so good for the relationship. So I definitely foresee that the Indian government will make the strongest possible démarche in this. And I think that our High Commissioner has already approached the Foreign Ministry there, and their ambassador has already tweeted himself condemning it. But at the same time, I don't see that there is going to be a reality. Only thing India can do is, I don't know if we can still go ahead and do it, that several bilateral engagements, multilateral engagements with Canada can be scaled down. Because if the government of the day is not really is helping out in any way, then we have to see our own interests first. Because it's not.
I remember Amrinder Singh. I remember Amrinder Singh.
Yes.
I remember Amrinder Singh, the former Chief Minister of Punjab, had refused to shake hands or even go and meet Justin Trudeau when he was in India because of the pro-Khalistani sentiment that Mr. Trudeau carried. Because of political expediency. But Pratikit Pine, here's the point. Okay, beyond optics, maybe right now there isn't much that India can do. India tried to do something way back in 2022 when that Khalistani referendum, that sham Khalistani referendum was being held again in Brampton. What happened? The Canadian government said, let it go ahead. It is just a peaceful democratic protest. I mean, imagine that. But the limited point I'm making to you is this, and to our viewers is this as well, that it's important for Canadians to remember their history. As Jaishankar has pointed out to it, and let me tell you what Mr. Jaishankar was talking about. He was probably talking about the Air India Flight 812, which was bombed by a Khalistani terrorist. It was on its way from Montreal to Bombay. Yes, there were Indian citizens killed and there were citizens from the United Kingdom who were killed. But out of the 329 citizens, 268 Canadian citizens were killed in that bombing by a Khalistani terrorist. And yet you continue to support these elements on your soil?
Shreya, good evening. That was precisely what I wanted to say, that what next would Trudeau tolerate and just remain mute spectator to? Are the Khalistani is going to celebrate the Kanishka bombing next time just to put out a point to India, and then Trudeau would remain silent? So the problem is this, Shreya. The fact is that sometimes elements like Trudeau need to behave like a G7 member, a country which is developed, so-called developed, and sometimes it has to go by the constitution, by a sovereign, the way a prime minister of a sovereign state is supposed to behave, instead of actually pandering to vote banks. Can you imagine if somebody allows people or certain extremist elements to celebrate the 9/11 bombing? I mean, it is almost akin to that. Political differences aside, what has been shown in this tableau is an insult to all the 140 crore Indians. She was a former prime minister. So what the Khalistanis are doing is to insult India. What Canadian government is doing is absolutely the same to insult India. Now, next time, I'm very sure very soon during the G20 summit, Trudeau would be in India. I don't think anybody will be interested in India to even shake hand with him, and he should be shown, the door. Frankly speaking, countries like Canada, the reason why we cannot, as of yet, have not been able to do beyond a point, because Canada is so irrelevant. There is not much trade. There is nothing you take from them. There is nothing you give them. So they're so irrelevant that there's a limit how much you can do. But probably the fundamental dimensions of a lot of things are changing. India is emerging as a voice of the 120 voiceless global South nations. Fundamentals are changing, and tomorrow I think countries like Canada will be kicked out of G7, and I will be very happy if India plays a role in that. Trudeau has become a joke and a lampoon. I am politically
We lost your audio there, Pratikrit. Go ahead, complete your point.
Yeah, Shreya, the fundamental point is this, that Mr. Jaishankar is so very right. These separatist element will not be able to achieve anything in India, but tomorrow they might ask for a separate, Khalistani land within Canada. And by pandering to these extremist elements, these are secessionist terrorist elements who are actually doing it. And the rest of the Sikh population in Canada have no option but to bow down to them, because otherwise they will be targeted. As a country, there has to be a difference between some kind of a different political view, some kind of, when you say that I oppose something, and then pandering to extremist viewpoint. This is extremism that is being done while being the immediate neighbor of the United States, which faced 9/11 terror attack. So I don't know what.
Yes, this is pandering. This is pandering to terrorists. Let's not even call them extremist elements. This is pandering to terrorists. Anyone who celebrates, who asks, for a part of Punjab, or anyone who celebrates the assassination of a former Prime Minister of India is a terrorist. So this is pandering to terrorists. Anil Trigunyat, before I wrap up this chat, I quickly want to ask you this. There's another element at play here. We understand the prowess of the Sikh community in Canada, their political prowess, right? They are 1.4% of the population of Canada. They number about 5 lakh. But we need to also remember that there is a large Hindu population in Canada as well. And I don't want to make this Sikh against Hindus. That is not my intent. But the fact is that every time Khalistanis, get away with murder in Canada, tensions between Sikhs and Hindus in Canada also peaks.
Yeah, I mean, this is because they tend to identify between India and Khalistan. That's what they try to differentiate. And so naturally, we have seen attacks on the Hindu temples, and we have seen, whether it is in Canada, Australia, US, UK, all of these places, there are these expat or exported Khalistani elements which are there, so-called, and they are living in a chimera, basically. And they are trying to create these problems and dissonance in the society. But they can thrive only because the governments of the day in those countries find it expedient to depend on them, allow them, enable them. Now, if they wanted really under the garb of freedom of expression, you can't allow these kind of things to happen, because this says clearly the Canada, which often talks about terrorism or action, is actually complicit with these kind of terrorist elements. Now, that is something I don't think in a free world the country can do. And I think the America and other countries must tell them that this Justin Trudeau is really crossing the red line just by pandering to these vote bank.
All right, we leave it there. Mr. Trigunath, good to have you on the show. Pratikit Pan, good to have you on the show as well. But we are keeping our focus on Canada because there's another story that is developing there. If you or your children are looking to go to Canada as an option for higher studies, our next story is something that you may want to watch. I'm slipping into a quick break. All the details are coming up next. Do stay with us.